you know, we have emitted, since we started burning fossil fuels 200 years ago, 250 years ago, we basically loaded the atmosphere with over 500 billion tons of carbon.
Hi there and welcome to Swiss Impact with Energies.
Come along on this eye-opening journey as we dive into sustainability and impact investing.
Here you'll meet inspiring individuals who are crafting a brighter future for all generations to come.
The potential for impact investment is boundless, and you can be absolutely sure be a part of this positive change.
Are you ready to dive in and make a difference? Let's take action for the benefit of both mankind and nature. Welcome, dear audience, to the 13th and last episode of our 8th season, where we will discuss climate change and sustainability again. So, Ben, do you want to say something before we continue with the program?
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to mention that today we should focus or try to focus on tipping point impacts. I know that we as people and science often like to think of all changes in linear terms, but nature, unfortunately, often works with tipping points.
Like BAM and...
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
And added to that, 2 days ago, I read an article that some natural changes are happening faster than the scientists have calculated or expected, and that the governments, in fact, should act faster to reduce use of fossil fuel. But we are also very well aware that the sense of urgency to act or do something about it seems to be lacking among our political and mainly our financial communities. Why is this discrepancy?
So that's we will figure out today together with our guest, Johan Rockström. So welcome, Johan, once again to Swiss Impact with Energies. Are you here with us today?
Yes, hello,
yes,
hello, Sid. Hello, Ben. Great to be with you again. A privilege. So great to be here.
Thanks, Johan. So just very briefly, it's really fantastic to have you with us. And as we had such enlightening discussion last time, so if anyone watching us now, please go back to the first part before you continue with the second one. And if you don't know who is Johan, very briefly, Johan is a globally recognized scientist specializing in sustainability and obviously climate impact. He's director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and professor in Earth System Science at the University of Potsdam and named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2023. So, in our previous episode, we delved into the foundational aspects of climate change and sustainability. And now, today, what do we start to discuss with?
Continue with the crucial conversation with Johan and find out what would be the solutions and everything. So, Johan, for the first question, is when discussing political willingness, how do you perceive the action of today's leaders and representatives regarding the urgency or the urgent situation of climate change? Do you think they are doing enough, or is there a significant gap between their commitment and the necessary actions?
Yeah, no, it's an important question. And unfortunately, there's a very simple answer. The mismatch between what science shows is necessary and what is actually politically been acted upon is a tremendous and unfortunately growing ravine between the two. And I say this despite the fact that we have, many leaders who really try, and they've understood that we have a major challenge, and they're doing their best. And I can take as examples what's happening in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in South Korea. The European Union arguably is the largest economic region in the world that has a relatively science-aligned climate policy with a 95% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions target by 2045, and even an end date for the internal combustion engine by 2035. So it's not as if we are totally in lack of political leadership. But when you add all this up, we're still investing in new coal. China increased coal-fired plants at a record speed last year. Global emissions of greenhouse gases continue rising. Air traffic continue increasing. Car traffic with diesel and petrol-driven cars continue increasing. So despite the fact that we are making progress on much of our renewable energy policies, for example, on solar and voltaic, it doesn't yet add up. We are not bending the curves properly. So we don't see the political leadership stepping up to really address this challenge in terms of the way science declares it as a planetary scale crisis. And I say this also in a spirit of frustration, to be honest, because whether we fail or succeed with the climate crisis is actually not about physics, it's about our choice. It's our choice. The window is still open to be able to have a manageable future, but it's our choice if we fail. And this makes the situation particularly serious right now.
Yes, I believe in that as well. We always have a choice, even though sometimes people say, oh, we don't have a choice. No, we always do. Right. So that's perfect, Johan. So how then the private sector can be incentivized to take also more proactive measures against climate change?
Well, you know, and that's a story that needs to be told time and time again. We would not have had the legally binding Paris Agreement, the framework that guides all climate policy in the world, if it hadn't been for the private sector. The private sector, before 2015, in the years running up to the Paris gathering, agreed to organize We Mean Business, the World Business Council, Sustainable Development, individual companies, gathering together to communicate in one voice that, you know, across all sectors, basically saying, science has made a very, very clear assessment. We have risks that we now need to resolve, and we are willing to start a path to decarbonize. That is what gave the political leadership the confidence and helped us across the humps in the negotiations, which gave us the Paris Agreement. After Paris, the political leadership has slided back, but businesses have tended to stay on track, actually. And that's what you see in the global car industry, for example, racing ahead, phasing out the internal combustion engine. It's not a question if we will stop using petrol and diesel, it's when, exactly. It's the pace of change. So the food industry, the same. The building and construction industry is slower, but you know, you open any quarterly report or annual report from any building company in the world, they will have a green construction and green building and circular business models as priorities. So I think we're seeing a clear direction for business in the world across all sectors, where sustainability is increasingly entering the boardrooms, entering the management teams as an element of competitiveness. I mean, admittedly, sustainability comes from corporate social responsibility. It comes from ESG reporting. It comes from an additional, burden on the businesses. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more companies and more sectors seeing that sustainability is a pathway to more innovation and more competitiveness and more better market shares. We're not there fully yet, but I would say that, to put it very simple, I think business is and must be and will continue to be, and it will increasingly be a force for the good.
Okay, thank you. In our last episode, we discussed about the tipping points, and we want to go a bit deeper into and discuss the critical points which are challenging us, the humans, today. So, for example, the Amazon rainforest is often mentioned as a critical tipping element. What, in your opinion, are the potential global consequences if it reaches its tipping point?
What is the Amazon Basin? Well, it's the richest, most diverse biome on land on planet Earth. So here we're talking of one of the big so-called tipping element systems. Tipping elements are the large biophysical systems. We know 16 of them that scientifically are proven to regulate, to control, to contribute to regulate the climate system. And the Amazon Basin is one of them. Why? Because it's such a tremendous carbon sink, and it regulate, not only that it absorbs carbon each year through photosynthesis, through its tremendously rich canopy cover, it also is a carbon stock by holding carbon like a bank account. But it's also generating 50% of its own rainfall and transporting moisture downwind, so that what's being released in moisture from the Amazon rainforest supplies fresh water down to Sao Paulo and Argentina. So it's a regional system, and it's also connected to the global climate system, given all the vapor and climate dynamics. So it's a system that I call today a global commons. It's a system that we all, as citizens on planet Earth, depend on for our human well-being, irrespective of where we live. If we live in Switzerland or in Germany or in Manaus, we're not equally dependent on it. I mean, admittedly, it is a Brazilian or Colombian or Costa Rican or Peruvian property, so to say, in the national jurisdiction sense, and all the indigenous communities and economies that depend on it. But we all are connected to the Amazon. So therefore, it makes us scientifically, and it should make the world, very worried that we see more and more signs that we are very close to a tipping point in the Amazon rainforest, because we know that rainforests can irreversibly tip over and become a savanna, just like a savanna can irreversibly tip over and become a desert. And this can only occur if they are under so much stress. And the stress on the rainforest is well understood. It is heating, global warming, and deforestation. And when you combine the two, what happens is you dry out the system, because rainforests are such dense canopy covers. They're so moist that they generate their own moisture. They're called rain forests because they generate rain. And when you open them up and you provide, you load them with more heat, you push them on a path of drying, and this is what can tip them over towards a savanna state. And if you move towards a savanna state, you lose carbon, you lose biodiversity, and you lose fresh water.
I'd like to clarify also about one more tipping point, which is the Greenland ice sheet. So how might crossing the Greenland ice sheet tipping point impact our world, Johan?
Yeah, so the Greenland ice sheet, the largest block of ice outside of Antarctica, equivalent to 7 meters global sea level rise if everything would melt. So we're talking of a global disaster if you would irreversibly commit the world to that level of sea level rise. It could take 1,000 years, but it would be unstoppable if you would cross a tipping point. Do we know that there's a tipping point in the Greenland ice sheet? The answer is yes, with very high certainty. Why? Well, because what determines a tipping point, just like in the Amazon, is if we find evidence of a shift in feedback, a shift in the logic or process that regulates its state. So a healthy Greenland ice sheet, meaning a permanent white surface, frozen white block of ice, reflects roughly 90% of incoming solar radiation back to space thanks to its white surface. And it's cold because, at the highest altitude, the Greenland ice sheet is so big that it's roughly 3,000 meters of elevation. When that starts melting, the surface gets darker because of a liquid surface, so it absorbs more heat, just like if you step into a black car compared to a white car, the black car, a sunny day, will be much, much warmer than a white car. It's the same principle, albedo, it's called. But the second principle is that the more the ice sheet melts, the lower is the altitude. And we all know when you walk down a mountain, it gets warmer and warmer. So these are the feedbacks. And at a very specific physical point, the ice sheet cannot stop melting anymore because it gets too dark and too low elevation. So it starts self-melting rather than self-cooling. And this is the drama that we may be approaching. Some scientists say we've already reached it. Other scientists say we have still some way to go. There is uncertainty here, but our latest assessment is that at 1.5 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise, meaning the Paris target, at that point, we're likely to cross the Greenland ice sheet tipping point. that would then commit all future generations to an unstoppable sea level rise of 7 meters. Now, what would happen over the next 70 years is, of course, you wouldn't get 7 meters like a tsunami, but the rate of sea level rise would increase. So instead of increasing with a few millimeters per year, you might see that rate jumping up. And instead of increasing the sea levels by 60, 70 centimeters by the end of the year 2100, which is the IPCC mean average sea level rise based on just the expansion of a warmer ocean and the melting if you don't cross tipping points, that might jump up to 1 meter or even 2 meters according to the latest science. And 2 meter sea level rise in the next 70 years, if the Greenland ice sheet starts really releasing at an accelerated rate, would be for certain a disaster for millions of people living in low-lying coastal zones and for low-lying island states, but also being very dramatic for New York, Shanghai, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Oslo, all the cities close to the ocean floor. So we're talking big risks here that we definitely want to avoid.
And we just came out of the COVID, and what is really scary is that the climate change could also potentially release dangerous and ancient or old pathogens and infectious viruses which has been frozen for tens of thousands of years in the Arctic permafrost, which can be a significant threat to the global health. And how serious is the threat of ancient pathogens being released from Arctic permafrost due to climate change, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, to start with, thawing of permafrost is one of the tipping element systems because you have hundreds of billions of tons of carbon. We have emitted, since we started burning fossil fuels 250 years ago, we basically loaded the atmosphere with over 500 billion tons of carbon. And the permafrost, just in the first top meters of organic soil, contains several hundred gigatons of carbon. So if you would start losing that and releasing that to the atmosphere, you would get a sudden, the planet would shift from absorbing carbon to become like another human agent of emissions. And right as we speak, there are vast fires in the Russian parts of Yamal. In the northern part of Mongolia, you see fires at unprecedented scale. You see permafrost thawing so fast that you have these sunk sinkholes, massive scale sinkholes. Things are changing very rapidly. That this can then, in addition to amplify warming, also lead to new, let's say, old infectious disease outbreaks because of surfacing of old mammoth skeletons. That is, of course, a risk that we also need to factor in. I cannot say what the probability or risk of that occurring is. I just think it's one of these factors that need to be considered as well, that we are fundamentally changing the stable state of the Earth system, and that this gives both physical but also health feedbacks, I think, is something we need to learn and take very seriously.
And do you think, or do you know if the tipping elements or the tipping points are interconnected? For example, that crossing one tipping point influences others and may lead to cascading effects.
Yeah, so the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, does not consider cascade risks so far. We have several scientific papers, though, that today indicate that there are cascade risks. The one that has been mostly studied is the risk that the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, the so-called AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which slows down when the Greenland ice sheet melts, and we understand that very well because it's a thermodynamic, it's a thermohaline engine, and cold fresh water dilutes the heavy saline surface water, which then sinks slower and slows down that whole overturning. There is science indicating that when that happens, it pushes the monsoon systems further south, which can impact on droughts, causing more droughts and more forest fires over the tipping element of the Amazon basin, which then would amplify warming by releasing more carbon. But there's also a risk that when the overturning of heat slows down, and of course the worst case would be that the AMOC collapses, then that would also lead to more warming of the Southern Ocean. So you would get an imbalance in the temperature distribution in the ocean, and with a warmer ocean just outside of Antarctica, you would get an acceleration of the melting of the tipping element over West Antarctic ice sheet. So the cascade would basically be that what's happening in the Arctic via the AMOC connects with Antarctica, and we know that the West Antarctic ice sheet is melting faster than expected, and we don't fully understand why, but it could be that it's actually related to what's happening in the North Atlantic. Just a little reminder, because we tend to forget this, which is really important never to forget, the globe has increased its temperature with 1.2 degrees Celsius on average so far, but the Arctic has warmed 3 degrees Celsius already today. So you have what we call the Arctic amplification effect, which means that increasingly science shows that what's happening in the Arctic is like a ground zero for change on planet Earth, which is not only because you have so many tipping elements there. You have the permafrost, you have the Greenland ice sheet, you have the AMOC, you have the Barents Sea ice, you have the Labrador Sea current. It's like a concentration of big tipping point systems, but also they're changing faster than anything else across the entire planet. And they seem to be connected via the AMOC, via the ocean, all the way down to Antarctica.
Okay.
Shall we dive even deeper in that? Because, with numerous wars and conflicts, climate change is intensifying food insecurity and resource competition, particularly in fragile regions, right? So how is it fueling wars and conflicts, and what can we do to mitigate its impact on vulnerable regions? Any advice here, Johan?
Yeah, well, to start with, to say that this is increasingly a research area. I mean, we're forced today to connect climate change, global environmental change with security, social stability, displacement, migration, and conflict. So this whole complex, which is even titled under a new research area of trying to understand, are we at risk of moving towards what is defined as a polycrisis? A polycrisis is when you have multiple global crises occurring simultaneously and reinforcing each other. So if you have a global food insecurity, a global pandemic with multiple wars, social instabilities because of geopolitical instability, plus climate change causing food and water insecurity, when these interact and reinforce each other, is there a risk that you get collapse? Social collapse of large societies. I would argue that we're not in a polycrisis yet, but that we have early signs that we need to be very worried of. What's happened with the Arab Spring, what's happened in Syria, what's happened. We know that the Syrian war, climate change and food insecurity was certainly not causing the war in Syria, but it was a threat amplifier, a risk amplifier. Same in Sudan, same in Chad, same in Niger, same during the Arab Spring. We cannot disentangle these things anymore. Climate change causing water scarcity leads to shifts in pastoralists and sedentary farmers, in marginal areas in the Sahel, which then leads to insurgence of militant groups and shifts in power balances, and you destabilize the social fabric because you're destabilizing the ecological fabric. And this is very difficult. The causality is almost impossible to prove, but we can, on the other hand, say with very high degree of certainty that we cannot, you know, distangle them. It's fresh water, land, temperature, heat, together with social vulnerabilities that together cause cocktails of high risk. So we are, and then this, by the way, is important to have on the table now that we are approaching the United Nations Summit of the Future and the New York Climate Week in September, where we'll be discussing, you know, we are halfway into the decade when the world is supposed to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. This is all about dignified life for all people, eradicating poverty and hunger. And not only are we not making progress, we're actually backpedaling. We're going backwards.
Right.
And of course, one reason for this, I would argue, is that the most vulnerable community societies under the pressure of climate change are having even less opportunity to develop, also because of these interactions between social and ecological factors that stress the system.
Yeah. And going back to that, so our ancestors, whom we often considered as primitive, were in fact far ahead of their time in terms of respecting and preserving the environment. They seem to have even had a deep understanding of the natural world and lived in harmony with it. Do you think reflecting on and integrating ancestral knowledge and practices is crucial in today's climate adaptation and mitigation strategies?
Well, Ben, the short answer is yes. I mean, we have more and more scientific evidence that the key feature we have to invest in is to build resilience. And the most important part, in my view, there is ecological resilience, the ability of our local natural capital or the environment, however you want to frame it, fresh water, biodiversity, air, carbon, soils, to not only be healthy in terms of being able to provide good ecosystem services like food and air and biomass and energy, but also withstand stress. Now, ancestral communities, indigenous communities understood this. They knew that they need to be stewards of the local environments for stability, for life support, but also resilience, for the ability to deal with, you know, the biblical analogy, the 7 years of hardship followed by 7 years of abundance. You have to prepare for abrupt changes, and ancestral communities knew that, you know, one of the key features of resilience is that you cannot act against optimization. You have to act against abundance. There's a certain abundance you need. You cannot chop down all the trees. You need to save certain parts as buffers. You need to save species. You have to have diversity. You have to have multiple choices. You cannot, as we do things on monocultures, depending on one source of everything. I mean, we're so fragile in the modern world that when you have one flood in Thailand, all the transistors for computer markets in the world shut down. Taiwan is being one of the only sources of the most advanced computer components for supercomputing. I mean, we have so much to learn also from indigenous knowledge. And as you know, 80%, I mean, the estimate is that 80% of the remaining biodiversity on Earth is within regions where indigenous communities still have stewardship responsibilities. So, you know, it's do you need more proof, basically?
They are doing something right, huh?
Exactly. Exactly.
Johan, and now bring it to very practical, ordinary people like me and Ben. So what would be some most effective strategies one can implement to cope with the effects of climate change? What can we do?
Well, I wouldn't say call anyone ordinary people. I think we're all citizens on this planet together. And I think that is partly my answer to this, that in my view, the most important thing we can do today is essentially what we're doing right now, which is to speak about this with our friends, be interested in the science, and try to stay azure with what's happening with planet Earth, and talk about this and engage as much as possible. We don't have to be activists, certainly not, but to be engaged citizens. I think that is the most important today, to get momentum, and that the story is not only a story of doom and gloom. The story is also all the evidence of solutions that we know we have, and that we can solve this problem, and that when we do, we'll be winners in the other end. That's number one. But then number two, of course, I think we need to be more brave as well. There's an urgency element here. So sticking out our neck and communicating with our local elected, not being too shy when we see unacceptable linear waste management in our local grocery stores, or whatever it may be. Engage in reducing waste, avoiding stupid consumption patterns, trying to advocate for more public transport. There's so much we can do. I live myself in Berlin, and you should know, it was a few weekends ago. It was just magical when coming through Berlin, and it was a manifestation for cycling, and they've had basically shut off half of Berlin and allowed only cycling, and
wow,
it was just magical to pass through Berlin with only bicycles. It was just another city, and it was silent, and it was so harmonious. And there is another future out there, which is so close that we can almost grasp, we can only almost touch it, almost smell it. And I think talking about this as a positive, I think is also very important.
Absolutely, not making depressed people with our TV shows like today, right? We need to, I agree with you, it's already there. We just need to come there. It's not that it's not there. The future is there. We are not there yet. So changing and doing our conscious choices of every day will help us to materialize that bright future, and not the ones where everything is gone. Especially us, not the nature will be there, but us.
Yeah, exactly.
In your extensive experience, what emerging trends or technological breakthroughs do you see as a game changer in the fight against climate change?
Yeah, well, the first set of technological breakthroughs are already in the making, and that is, of course, the transition to green energy systems. And we can say today, which we've been able to say just over the last 1-2 years, that on any market in the world, green energy is cheaper than fossil fuel-based energy, even without subsidies. And that applies everywhere, in any climate, any market. And that is, of course, solar and wind technology, and it's particularly solar EV technology that is at a point where the exponential curve has reached its full applicability across the world. The second area is, of course, mobility, the technologies to abandon the internal combustion engine, which is absolutely fundamental. And when you think of it, a modern society where 70% of the world population lives in cities, the kind of the artery in that system is heavy trucks. Heavy trucks is what enables us to be urban consumers in the first place. I mean, if you don't have the truck transports, you don't get food, and you don't have anything in the shops. Everything just shuts down. The moment those trucks run on electricity instead than on diesel, it sends a psychological signal to the whole society that we have tipped over into something completely new, and that technology is happening, and it's happening fast. The third part is more difficult, which is on construction. How do we transition away from fossil fuel-based steel, iron, all forms of metals, and construction materials, particularly concrete. This is a slower, I mean, the construction industry is slower, but technologies are there. It's interesting that we can actually build green buildings, even high-story buildings, that can store carbon, that are not based on fossil fuel-based systems. The steel industry is also on the verge of that innovation, of going away from coal-based steel production to hydrogen and hydrogen-based technologies, which are today piloted at large scale, for example, in northern parts of Sweden and in Germany. So these things are happening. And then finally, I think it's clear that the food system transition has also all the solutions. We know that the food system, I mean, from the farmer's field all the way to the 30% waste that we generate when we consume the food in cities, shipped across the entire world, which is wasted. Across that value chain, we have the solutions of how to come back into planetary boundaries, meaning not expanding into continued loss of rainforests, reducing animal-based proteins, so we move away from the monoculture-based big factory farming for livestock, not getting rid of all livestock, but moving towards more.
Why not? Vegan talking.
No. I mean, of course, if you go all the way to being vegetarian or vegan, even better. But if you look at food security across the entire planet, we know that there will still be livestock, particularly in the global south, and there will also be degrees of animal protein in our diets across the entire world. And there are livestock systems that are sustainable if they are based on extensive grazing systems that actually in many of the ecosystems actually contribute to more biodiversity and can even in many studies sequester more carbon. So one should recognize that the solutions across most sectors, from the food industry all the way to the heavy aluminium and steel industry, exist already today. And we are on a rapid innovation curve. So we'll see more, and it will get cheaper, and it gets cheaper when volumes increase. I would say that the piece that is lacking of my description here is that the global economy is still at large operating on a linear path. We exploit in one end, and then we add value, we consume, and we waste. Now we have to close these loops. And interesting with that loop closure is that not only is it necessary because we have to stay within the finite boundaries of the planet, but we see more and more evidence that closing of loop is more efficient, more you can earn more, you can simply be more successful if you are able to go from the linear systems to more circular systems. And I think that's one of the big transformations we'll also see in the years to come, which is unavoidable. Even without sustainability science, we have to move in that direction. I mean, there is no future for 10 billion people living dignified lives unless we go circular. It's very simple. Yeah. You cannot continue with a linear economy with such a large urban or a large human demand. You cannot respond to that demand simply. So there are many paths of innovation that are occurring today and that need to speed up.
We see the same. All technologies are there, many evolving. It just like capital needs to be shifted and you need to scale it up. So then we can solve many challenges currently existing. Johan, about the research, there have been so much research done on the topic of climate change, but what is actually underexplored in the area of research and what would need more attention? Maybe you can talk also about the green water, what it is and why it's important.
Yeah, no, I mean, admittedly, we've come furthest. I mean, in the whole sustainability science area, if you look at the natural sciences, we've come furthest when it comes to climate science. But we showed today very clearly that you need to take a whole Earth system approach, even if you only focus on solving the climate crisis. So planetary boundaries is a framework that addresses that integrated Earth system approach, but then it shows very clearly that the only chance to deliver on the Paris Climate Agreement is that you come into the safe space on fresh water, both green and blue water. I'll come back to that. Land, biodiversity, nitrogen, phosphorus, air pollutants, and chemicals. So you're right. We need more, let's say, Earth system-based research across all the planetary boundaries. One of the big factors where there's a lot of research already, but more is needed, is in recognizing that we are, for the first time as humans on planet Earth, changing the supply of fresh water. So we have over hundreds of years recognized that we are impacting on the flow of water through our rivers and groundwater, and the challenge of supplying clean water to cities, and ensuring that we try to manage the quality and quantity of water. But we've never had to face the fact today that we're changing the very tap that everything starts with, which is rainfall, that we're changing the rainfall. And how are we doing that? Well, we're doing that through global warming. Global warming leads to more evaporation, which adds more moisture into the atmosphere, which makes the whole hydrological cycle more powered up. There's more energy, and therefore it leads to more extreme events. So you get more water, but it doesn't help us because it comes down as more fierce downpours, and it gets more erratic. So you get more long droughts and more long floods. But then what happens when the rainfall lands on land, because we're undermining or degrading our nature, too little water infiltrates, and the water that infiltrates in the soil is what we call green water. Green water is the moisture in the soil, and that's the fresh water that basically operates all the photosynthesis. So you look out of your window, all the grass, all the trees, all the plants, everything that is growing is doing it based on green water, the water in the root zone, the water in the soil. This is by far the largest share of fresh water in the global hydrological cycle, roughly 60%. It's by far the largest share of fresh water that we depend on as humans, because it's the bulk of the fresh water behind our food. So we depend on green water for food, for biodiversity, for all our timber, but also for all the carbon uptake in nature. So 30% of the carbon dioxide that we burn from oil, coal, and gas that we emit, 30% of that is taken up in the remaining 50% on land, which is intact forest systems. And it can only do that thanks to the green water. We learned this in our basic school. The photosynthesis is water plus carbon dioxide becomes sugar. And if you don't have water, green water, you cannot take up carbon dioxide, and there is no biomass. So green water is like the bloodstream, the very life stream that we all depend on, and it's an underestimated source because we don't manage it, we don't have policies for it, there's no regulations for it, there's no economic values associated.
Fortunately, yeah. Otherwise, you would do something wrong for sure.
Yeah. So there's more research needed to recognize that this is an important asset that we all depend on, and we should support, for example, agricultural practices and landscape management that secures the green water, so that we can also secure rainfall and secure the services that green water provides to our societies.
Thank you for bringing everyone back to school, Johan. I think as everyone learned photosynthesis, but what it actually means, we sometimes forget.
Yeah,
Thanks for that.
I didn't even know it. So thanks for explaining this green water phenomena. And can you share any success stories or case studies where climate action has made a significant positive change?
Well, it depends on what you mean by climate action. You mean more any type of initiative?
Technologies, initiatives, policies?
Yeah, you know, well, of course, one positive policy story was in 1990 when the Swedish government introduced the highest, still highest, carbon tax in the world, 100 euros or US dollars per ton of carbon dioxide. It's still considered very high, but you can imagine 1990 and 1991 actually, to be exact. And this is what led to an energy revolution in the country. So every household, all cities threw out their oil-based heating systems and transitioned into a new innovation, which was to use residual from the forest industry, so pellets basically, to heat both apartments, high-rise buildings, and individual homes. So if you go to any city in Sweden today or to any private home, I can assure you, you will never ever find an oil-based heating system, thanks to that policy of 1991. So that's one positive innovation. I think in the US, you actually have an innovation which is rarely recognized, which is that an estimate is that almost 40% of agriculture in the US does no longer use plowing, but uses different forms of zero tillage systems. And this was, after the 1930s, tremendous, erosion catastrophe where you had a massive loss of soil because of over mechanization of plowing, and combined with extreme drought conditions during a period. And the transition from that was either to invest huge amounts of funding into mechanization and terracing, or to stop plowing. And the choice was to stop plowing and move in a direction to work more with nature, meaning disturbing soil as little as possible to keep organic matter intact in the soils. And this has been very successful. And today we see conservation agriculture, conservation tillage as one of the technologies to produce food with minimum disturbance of soils, that also builds the biology and organic carbon, organic matter in the soils, which we also know gives more resilience to the farming systems because you can hold more moisture in the soils. So there's quite a very positive story about how, not driven by climate risks directly, but more about stability of soils. There has been quite a change also in agricultural practices. Now, there are many today advocating for this to continue on different continents in the world. So there's conservation agriculture efforts across Africa. That's come a long way in Latin America. There's efforts in India, and Europe. So there's much more needed. But these are examples that we come back to this. That this is not a fantasy journey. These are solutions that exist.
Absolutely. Yes, Johan, just to round up a few challenging questions for you. So despite all the challenges we discussed today, what keeps you motivated, positive, hopeful in your work towards sustainable future? But in just one word, what is that?
In one word.
In one word.
Yeah, I think it is, I'm trying to find the word for it, but it's advancing. I think we are. I mean, I'm trying to say that the future we're aiming for is a more advanced step. We're not going backwards, we're going forward. It's you can call it more modern or more, more advanced.
More advanced. That's a good one. Yeah, we need to advance, evolving. Perfect. Thank you. And Johan, can you say a last call to action message to our global audience, and whatever it is about the urgency of climate action and whatever it is on your heart right now?
The key message would probably be to take risks seriously, but also recognize that the transformation is not only necessary, it's possible. And if we succeed, we will all be winners in the other end.
We only can win together. That's right. Johan, thanks a lot for joining us twice. It's really an honor to have you with us. And we are looking forward to see you in person here in Switzerland or in any country you will be. So it's absolutely an honor. Thank you for sharing your insights with us and audience.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye there.
Dear audience, with this, we end the TV show of today and the season 8. Looking forward to see you in the next season and advance on this journey. As Johan said, we can only make it and win together. Otherwise, we will be only losers.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey today.
We hope this incredible story has ignited something in you. Don't miss out on what's coming next. Subscribe to our channel and stay tuned.
Feeling inspired to support our guests or be featured on our next show? Get in touch with us at apply@iisolutions.ch.
Let's stay connected. Find us on TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, or any other social media platform you love.
We are super excited to share our upcoming episodes with you.
See you soon.